Okay, so the year is 2022. It is the 2060th anniversary of the assassination of Julius Caesar. And so the historical podcast scene in July is awash with podcasts about Julius Caesar, his campaigns, and of course, what led to his ultimate destruction on the Ides of March. In beautiful detail is described the graphic scene, the senators surrounding Julius Caesar with their false claims. They just want to talk to him about a bill they want to pass. Someone grabs the cloak. They all start hacking and stabbing. And of course, finally, Brutus, fated Brutus, comes towards Julius Caesar. The two men lock eyes. And of course, the famous words are uttered. Et tu, Brute. And at that point, all the podcast hosts jump in, screaming from the top of their lungs that, of course, that was not Julius Caesar's actual last words. That was an invention by Julius Shakespeare. And if you take nothing away from all these different little outlets discussing the life and times of Julius Caesar, all the controversy, the questions, was Cleopatra's child really Julius Caesar? Was the genocides in France worthy of more critique? All that pales in comparison to that one important point: Julius Caesar never said "Et tu, Brute." And I get it. I get why all these historians are really, really quick to jump in and say, hey, that is literature. It's even a good bit of literature, but it's not history. You shouldn't let Shakespeare dictate to you what actually happened in the real world. And so in the end, people like to point towards the original sources. My personal favorite, Suetonius, the gossip, especially when dictated to by Derek Jacobi.
Return home, unless chosen pontiff. And so far did he outweigh.
All have it that Julius Caesar's actual last words were, of course, "You too, my son," or "You too, my child," the Latin, you know. And of course, the question is, what did that phrase actually mean? Brutus wasn't technically his son, or was he? Because that's the first thing that comes to our minds whenever we read that line. Was Brutus secretly the child of Julius Caesar? Apparently, Brutus's mother and Julius Caesar did have a thing, but that was well after Brutus was born. But then maybe not. Maybe this is like he saw him as a adopted son, or maybe a legitimate son. Who knows? That's usually where people's minds go to first, at least in the 21st century, with regards to Brutus, that this was some sort of betrayal either from a literal or figural father to a literal or figural, I really should figure out that word, son. And of course, that's been the interpretation for quite a while now. But there is a twist in the tale, because I wouldn't be talking about this otherwise if that was the end of the story. You see, the irony is, the interpretation by a lot of historians at the moment of that line, "You too, my child," is not so much, "You too have betrayed me, my metaphorical son." Some people now question if that phrase is more like, hey, look at me, Brutus. They called me a tyrant. Now I'm dying. You could suffer this same fate too. So whether that's a final word of wisdom, "You too, my child, could suffer this horrible fate," or it's the bloody last words of a bitter man, "You'll get this too, young man." Either way, that interpretation moves the gaze away from any potential sonship towards this idea of revenge, which of course brings us back to William Shakespeare. Because as we've firmly established, Shakespeare had the line "Et tu, Brute," not "Et tu, my son?" I don't know what it is in Latin, but the point is Shakespeare shifted the gaze away from any possible sonship to the fact that this was just Brutus attacking him. The betrayal is not necessarily inherent in the phrase "Et tu, Brute." Like, it could be interpreted that way, but it doesn't have to be. And of course, this gives scope to so many actors and directors to play it either way. And lately I've noticed there's been a lot of productions presented as a "you'll get this too, boy" in the text. So in a way, even though Shakespeare, yes, did indeed get the final words wrong, it wasn't "Et tu, Brute," it was "You too, my son." But Shakespeare shifts away from that possible interpretation of betrayal to possibly a more authentic idea of you will cop this too if you're not careful. And of course, this is all rammed home all the more in the final scenes where, of course, Brutus is about to fight that battle at the very end with Mark Antony attacking, and he's all getting the ghost of Julius Caesar reminding him, and eventually he does indeed kill himself on the battlefield. You don't remember that? You stopped watching after the Friends, Romans, Countrymen speech? Yeah, so did I mostly. But the long and the short is cut William Shakespeare some slack. He's not out there to retell history, but rather trying to explore what do these human experiences really mean. And possibly shifting those final words away from the historic to his own little spin allowed for a more intrinsically true version of Caesar's last words. Long and the short, maybe William Shakespeare was right. But of course, what do I know? Let me know what you think. What was Julius Caesar's last words? Did he say any last words? Do you prefer the cloak coming over his head? What's your favorite portrayal of Julius Caesar's death in, I don't know, film, media, video games? Are you an Assassin's Creed fan? I don't know. But regardless, leave it in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully you'll see me again later. Bye. If your teacup is buzzing, that's probably a bad thing, right?